My ultimate takeaway is the royal family has nothing to worry about this book. It's a book of fairy tales. It's a book of slander. It's poorly written. It wasn't edited. It was incoherent 75% of the way. Hey, welcome to the epilogue of Spare. I told you last time it's gonna be the last episode, but I didn't have a chance to get to the epilogue. I promised you that we would get to it and then I would tell you the last two stories that are in the epilogue. Both of them are ridiculous. This epilogue was very clearly written as his answer to the Queen's passing. He couldn't not speak about that, and so he has, some little thoughts to share with you about the Queen, mixed in with a lot of sob stories about how his family mistreated him and maligned him and disrespected his wife when he went to England for the funeral. So I think the thing that is crazy to me about the last episode that I did, do you guys remember the story about the broken ornament and how they hung it on the tree and then it got smashed on the floor and then Archie took a spray bottle and tried to spray it back into existence? And I have a theory about why he did that. I think probably they spray the dogs with a spray bottle, like when the dogs aren't acting right. And I'll bet you anything Archie thought, oh, when I don't like the situation that's happening, I spray it and then that fixes the problem. I'll bet you that's why he did it. But anyway, I think it's strange that he would include that story because it was a pretty nothing story. He didn't really need that story. He didn't need the story about the psychic either. So he could have cut both of those out and just remained more respectful about the Queen, because the book went to press after she died. And I think the story about the smashed ornament and, him just kind of sweeping it into the dustbin and like that being that, I think that the symbolism of that so near her death is disrespectful. It didn't have anything to do with love or honor or anything. And in the passing of her, it just seemed like a twisted little story of, how little she meant to him. She was nothing more than a souvenir that could be broken and thrown away, and that's that. And the Queen was so much more than just a face to put on souvenirs, And anyway, so in the epilogue, he does talk about her death. But again, I think that knowing that she had passed when the book went to print, if I was going to take some stories out, if I'd been him, I definitely would have taken out the story about the ornament. Okay, the epilogue. We begin the epilogue. He and Meghan are going to go visit Diana's grave for the first time together. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I kind of think that it's weird that he's never taken her to see his mother's grave in all their times together. I'm not sure what the problem was. I know that her grave is on a little island and you have to get to it by boat, like a rowboat. But that shouldn't have stopped them from going earlier in his relationship. And there's multiple times in the relationship when he would talk about how he and William would go and lay a wreath at her grave, but Meg wouldn't join them. And I don't understand why that was. But anyway, it's not a big point. It's just strange to me that this far into the relationship, they're married now, they've got 2 kids now she goes, okay. Anyway, he says that they get in the boat, they row over, they kind of got stuck in the mud at one point, but they managed to free themselves. It was the 25th anniversary, so I guess that was a big enough an occasion to include his wife in the visit. And he says this statement that just feels like forced intimacy. I mean, it just feels like such a false statement of love. But he goes, "At long last, I was bringing the girl of my dreams home to meet Mom." This is the girl of your dreams? In your wildest dreams, when you could think of anybody that you could have in your life, it was Meghan? Interesting. He says that they hesitate in front of the stone, hugging each other. And then he went first. He placed flowers on the grave. And Meg gave him a moment. He spoke to his mother in his head, told her he missed her, asked for guidance and clarity. And then, feeling that Meg might also want a moment, he wandered off into the distance and let her have her moment, went out to scan the pond. And of course, when he comes back, Meg can't just be standing there respectfully at the grave. she's got to make a big show of it. She's kneeling, her eyes are shut, she's got her palms against the stone. I mean, what a freaking production, really. I feel like if I took somebody to my mother's grave and then they knelt down with their eyes closed, their hands on it as though they're worshiping or praying it, I would almost be offended, especially if they'd never known her. Like, it'd just be like, you don't have to do that for my benefit. It's really okay, get up. Anyway, there she is praying to the goddess Diana, asking for clarity and guidance. And he says that then he was supposed to go to the Well Child Awards on September 8th. But then he gets a call around lunchtime from an unknown number. Who should it be? But it's Pa. Well, what did Pa do? Change his number? Anyway, Granny's health is taking a turn for the worst, it would appear. And she's up at Balmoral. And he said that Pa hung up. He said he had a lot of calls to make. And Harry immediately texted Willie and Kate, he says, to see if they were flying up. And when are you going? And how are you going? And basically, can I get a ride with you? But wouldn't you know it? Nobody could be bothered to respond. So he and Meg were forced to, like the proletariats they are, look at flight options. Was this going to mean they were going to have to fly on a regular plane, a commercial jet? Not that. Of course, then the press starts phoning, and he's going to have to miss the Well Child Awards, obviously, because he's got to go to Scotland. But then he gets another call from Pa. And if you can believe it, guess what he says next? Pa said that Harry was welcome at Balmoral, but he didn't want her. He started to lay out a reason, but Harry says it was just completely and totally nonsensical, didn't make any sense, disrespectful, that's what it was. And Harry wasn't having it. Don't you ever speak about my wife that way, don't you dare! Pa stammered and apologized, and he's like, the thing is though, Kate's not even coming. So let's just have it be immediate family, like the grandkids. And Harry's like, well, why don't you say that then? Why don't you say wives weren't coming? Why are you going to make it out about Meg? Something's wrong with Meg. And I do have to say that if I were Charles, I would have started out with that initially. I would have been like, well, you know, all wives aren't coming. You know, I think maybe you don't. In a situation like that, when emotions are already running so high, I think that I can't imagine, and this is one of the reasons why I almost don't believe the story, because I can't imagine that somebody would be as tacky as to say, you can come, but not your spouse, just because, of course, they're going to overreact to that. Pa's too diplomatic not to see what those words would do if he said them. So I just don't believe that whole thing happened. But then again, maybe it did, because if Granny was still alive and we know that Meghan had caused all this stress, wouldn't you want her last moments to just be peaceful? So maybe in that moment, Charles was like, I don't even care. I want to preserve the last moments that my mother has on this earth and not fill it up with a bunch of snakes. Anyway, all this to say, now it's too late for Harry to catch a flight with William. By this point, Harry's hemmed and hawed. He can't find a way up to Scotland. And William never responded. So he doesn't know what to do because there's no more commercial flights. He's dragged his feet, okay? Like, he should have initially been like, let me just book a flight. But no, he's dragged his feet. William clearly wasn't answering. He should have immediately, upon realizing that there was an emergency and he wasn't hearing back from William, just been like, that's fine, I'll find my own way, and booked a flight then. But of course not. So now he's got to charter out of Luton. Somebody explained to me, I mean, my only option was to charter a private plane. I wish that could one day be one of my options. He says he was on board 2 hours later. And he spent the flight just staring out the window, thinking about Granny, thinking about the last time they talked. They'd had a lovely little conversation, very jokey, very self-deprecating. He was making fun of his bald head and saying that, you know, his head looked like the lawn at Frogmore, which was very dry and in terrible shape. Again, always complaining about his accommodations. As the plane was descending, his phone lit up and Meg was texting him, call me the moment you get this. He checked the BBC and Granny was gone. Pa was king. So he put on his black tie and he walked off the plane into a thick mist, sped in a borrowed car to Balmoral. And when he got there, his Aunt Anne was there to greet him. He hugged her. He didn't know where Pa or William or Camilla was. She said that they had gone to Burke Hall, and then she asked if he wanted to see Granny, and of course he did. And she led him upstairs to Granny's bedroom where he braced himself. He says that the room was very unfamiliar to him. He probably had only been in there once in his whole life. And there she was. And he stood there frozen, staring. And he said it was difficult, but he forced himself to look because he kept thinking about, if somebody had done this for me when my mother had died, I wouldn't have spent such a long time wondering where she was. I would have been forced to believe it because people had been honest with me. So he forced himself to stare at her face so that he would, knowing his propensity for imagination. He whispered that he hoped she was happy and he hoped that she was with Grandpa. You know, he had his little moment with her, saying how proud he was of her for everything that she had accomplished. That was that. So then he goes out of the room, he calls Meg, tells her that he's okay. Still can't find Paul, William, and Camilla. They are avoiding him like the plague. He did manage to find them at the meal where they all sat silently eating. And then he got up from the meal and wandered Balmoral for a while. Just wandered around the rooms. He doesn't make it clear why he didn't fly back with William and Pa. He says, well, the quickest way back would have been a lift with Pa and Willie. Barring that, it was British Airways, departing Balmoral at daybreak. I bought a seat and was among the first to board. And soon after settling into front row, I sensed a presence on my right. Deepest sympathies, said a fellow passenger before heading down the aisle. Thank you. And moments later, another presence. Condolences, Harry. Thank you very much. Most passengers stopped off for a kind word, and I felt a deep kinship with them all. Our country, I thought. Our queen. Yes, your country, your queen. This is your place. This is your place. It was for this that you were brought into this world. You just decided to spurn it and act like it was just nothing. Well, he gets back to Frogmore. Meg greets him at the door in a long embrace. They needed to get out of there. Desperately needed to get out of there. He sits down for a glass of water and to pour over the calendar. When can we get home? But they can't, because they've got to have 10 days of walking around being sad. Which is kind of the way he describes it. It isn't even as though he wanted to stay and grieve. It's just duty and obligation, if I must. And he says that there are difficult days. Really, all they wanted to do was get back to the kids, but unfortunately, gotta grieve the queen. He says when the funeral finally took place, William and he barely exchanged a word. They took their familiar places, set off on that familiar journey behind another coffin draped in the royal standard, sitting atop another horse-pulled gun carriage. It was the same route, the same sights, although thank God this time there was some music so it wasn't so dreary. They got to St. George's Chapel, and everything about this place was so meaningful to him, because this had been where Grandpa's farewell had been. His own wedding had taken place at St. George's Chapel. Even in ordinary times, even just an Easter Sunday, had always felt really poignant here. And here now the whole family was alive and together. And he says that's what made him cry. But I tend to believe that what made him cry was that the death of the Queen was like the end of an era, an end of his own personal era. As far as he had ever known it, she'd always been at the head. And I think that he always felt like a safety in what he had known. Now everything has changed so quickly. I mean, he met Meg and then everything fell off the rails immediately. And now it'll never go back to how it used to be. It could never feel like it used to be. But at least when the Queen was alive, there was like the hope that everything's still in place. I just have to find my way back. But now she's gone. And now Pa's in charge, really in charge. And so there'll never, even if you come back, it'll never be the way it was. And it's all over now. So he's crying. And, wondering why he's crying. Well, you're at a funeral. It could be that. And then the following afternoon, him and Meg hightail it out. He says that for the next couple of days, they just couldn't stop hugging their kids, couldn't let them out of their sight. And he couldn't stop thinking about when he had introduced the children to Granny. He said Archie kept making these very deep, chivalrous bows, and the little Lilibet, cuddled at the monarch's shins. Harry claims that she said they were the sweetest children, and like, she sort of sounded bemused, like, shocking, and she said that she'd expected them to be well, he says that he assumed, so she didn't say it, but he assumed that she expected them to be a bit more American, more rambunctious. She didn't say that. She just said they were sweet children. So he's adding in that little bit of color there. And I find it interesting that Archie's over there making these big bows. Let's all recall that pathetic scene in the Netflix documentary when Megan does that ridiculous bow. It's almost like she had taught Archie to do it in a mocking sort of way. Now that's me certainly adding my take on it, but it would not even surprise me if she'd been like, now when you meet your grandmother, you're gonna have to do this. How she does, making a big joke about it. Anyway, so all this to say, they're delighted to be home, delighted to be back into the routine of things. He says that he just couldn't stop reading his kids that dumb book, Giraffes Can't Dance. Do you guys know that children's book? If you have kids, you probably do. It's this book, and it's so funny to me that this would be the book he loves to read to his kids, because I can imagine him finding all sorts of meaning in this little African tale. It's not an African tale, but I mean, it's a book that's like set in Africa about this giraffe that can't dance. He's so awkward, and then he goes to this party, and then he starts dancing, and everybody laughs at him, so he like goes off by himself, and while he's off by himself, he meets this cricket, and the cricket tells him, sometimes if you can't dance, it's just because you haven't found a song that your soul resonates with. And so the cricket starts playing for him, and then under the moon, all alone, he learns how to dance. And then everybody comes and gathers around. They can't believe it. If only they could dance as well as the giraffe. And look, he went off by himself and learned his own way. And if you can't see the metaphor there. Anyway, so we're still waiting for Harry to learn how to dance. If anything, this giraffe just fell down a hole and he's not coming back up. Anyway, day and night, images are floating through his mind of the Queen. He just can't stop thinking about her, because to hear him tell it, he and the Queen had the specialist of special relationships, and that they were always whispering jokes to each other and keeping each other entertained, and he was always catching her off guard with some funny little comment. And anyway, they just loved each other, and I believe that. I mean, I think everybody knew that about them, that she seemed to delight in him, and he in her. And so I think that to lose her was to lose somebody who had always loved him unconditionally. And he says that, he writes that, special relationship, that's what they said about us. And now I couldn't stop thinking about the specialness that would no longer be, the visits that couldn't take place and wouldn't take place. But the ones that you ruined, you could have fully participated in her last years, but instead you wanted to make it all about you, and you wasted her last years. I mean, she was extremely elderly when you got married. You knew that these were her last years on Earth, and yet you kept thinking, fiddly-dee, I'll think about that tomorrow. Well, tomorrow's here and she's dead, and you ruined it. And of course, what do you think we end it with? Another animal story. This is how he ends this book. This is how he ends the epilogue. Apparently a hummingbird got into the house. Couldn't get it out of the house. Oh no. So he calls a friend of his. The friend says, and again, I tend to think that this mate of his that he called is the same one who told him that maybe you're enjoying killing the Taliban on motorcycles because of your dislike for the paparazzi who also ride motorcycles. Remember that? He always just got this mate who's got like these words of wisdom, yet the unnamed mate is probably just Megan. He says that the mate told him that maybe the hummingbird is a sign. A sign of what? Well, apparently hummingbirds are incarnated warriors. The Spanish explorers called them resurrection birds. Resurrection birds, okay. Not to put too fine a point here. But the Aztecs apparently called them reincarnated warriors. The Spanish explorers, who would have been Catholic, called them resurrection birds. I tend to believe that what the Aztecs were believing as far as reincarnated warriors and the Spanish explorers calling them resurrection birds are coming from two completely different traditions. Be that as it may be, this hummingbird ain't your grandma. But whatever. He says that he, after realizing who it was, he let the hummingbird just swoop around the kitchen and, you know, flit around in their sacred space. After wrestling with whether it was trying to come into the house as a destination point or as a detour, he finally decided it might be time to get it on its way. So he said that gently, using Archie's fishing net to scoop it up from the ceiling, he carried it outside. So again, I find this outrageous. He thought that this could be his grandmother. And instead, he takes a toy, traps the bird, and chucks it outside. Bye, Granny. We really don't want you here. He sets the hummingbird gently on the wall. Goodbye, my friend. But it just lays there, motionless. So then he thinks, no, I've killed it. But he didn't. It's free. It flies away. And the last line of the book is this: and then, against all odds and against all expectations, that wonderful, magical little creature bestirred itself and flew away. Okay. What a dumb book. Okay, my final thoughts. This is a book written by somebody who had never an intention to write a book. This is a person who wrote a book because he was told to do it. Because he was told it would make him some money. This was not written by anybody who had any care or craft for the art of writing. This is not a book written by anybody who had a path for which they wanted to take you on. They did not have a plan for how they wanted to tell you their story. This is a book that should never have been written. Not because it's so startling in its revelations. Quite frankly, it isn't. Because I know that a lot of people are like, this is just unbelievable, all the things he's writing. This is a book of fairy tales. This is a book of fever dreams and, you know, notes jotted down when he was high as a flippin' kite. This is not a book that anybody should take seriously. This is why the royal family's not answering to it. Because why would you? Would I open up Grimm's Fairy Tales and be like, well, wait a second, that story about Cinderella, you know, I'm not so sure she's just living in the fireplace, rubbing ashes into her face. It's like, I don't need to respond to that. That's a book of fiction. And this is a book of fiction. This book here, it's just absolutely of no consequence. It's of no consequence whatsoever. Every story that was told had no reason for being told. There was no cohesive ideas. There was no plan for how to take you on this journey. I mean, I'm repeating myself at this point. I'm just disgusted by it. But what I will say is, it is no threat to the royal family. None whatsoever. It makes Harry look like the king of fools. But it does not make... And if I were in the family, I would be indignant only because I'd be like, this is the best you could do? I mean, I would be offended for him as an intellectual. But I wouldn't care. I mean, all of this is just falsehoods. It's all just falsehoods. And it just shows him as petulant and immature and selfish and unkind and, quite frankly, cruel at many opportunities. A complete and total disaster of a human being. Delusions galore. I mean, the number of animal references alone. I don't understand this quasi-spirituality he has. One of the things I think is interesting about Harry is just his true desire for some kind of spirituality in his life. With all the animal references and going to see the psychic, and how many times, like when he delivers his second child and he wants to ask it, where did you come from and was it better there? It's like he wants to believe in realms that are bigger than him. And I would tend to believe that because he's done so many psychedelics, he probably has bumped up quite a few times against the spiritual reality of this world. But one of the things that I think is so sad for him is there is a rebellion in him against any kind of higher power that could tell him anything. And I'm not talking about just earthly higher powers. I mean, we see that trend towards rebellion when it comes to anybody telling him anything. He really resents that. We've seen that his whole life. But what's interesting is he was not willing to submit himself to a higher spiritual power, but he was willing to submit himself to Megan. I think it is no mistake that he called that third part of the book Captain of My Soul. For those who are religious at all, God himself would be the captain of my soul. And I'm safe there in laying my soul. I mean, it belongs to him anyway, but me recognizing that I am not my own, there's a safety in that, because I have somebody who is going to carry me and hold me and walk me through life, and that there is no thing that I can experience. The worst things of my life that I will experience do not go unseen by him, do not go unnoticed by him. I am borne up in every tragedy by him. And I look at Harry and I think he wanted somebody to take care of him. And he wanted somebody to guide him and lead him. And instead of choosing a true higher power, like God himself, he decided to put all of his trust in Megan. Whatever Megan said to do, he did. And it was a way earlier video that I did. I think there's a short out there. There is a short out there. And where I'm saying I feel like what Harry did was he outsourced his emotions to Megan. And I think that he had so much feeling, so much that he did not know how to sort out in his own life, that he gave it all to somebody who's never had any trouble telling you what she thinks and even telling you what you should think. And so I think he saw in her like this really strong person. She would be his guiding light. She would be his guiding force. And I truly mean this. She's guiding him straight down to destruction. In the short amount of time that he knew her, everything about his life has changed. And I would not say for the better. They live in a, beautiful home in California. That's really good, but really, that's what you wanted? The only thing that has become better in his life is perhaps his accommodations. But what of a big house? Who cares? Who cares? You want to knock around a huge, gigantic house? That's going to get old. Everything gets old. Everything you think you want, you get, and then you're like, okay. That's human nature. It's the people. It's like, what are you doing with your time? What are the goals in your life? Like, that's what makes life interesting. What am I trying to accomplish? How is my relationship with God? How are my relationship with the people around me? How am I contributing to society? What am I doing to make the world a better place? And genuinely a better place. Not so I can have a foundation and on paper say, well, I've got this foundation. No, but like, really, what am I doing in my life today, at this moment? What am I doing to minister to the people who are in my immediate circle? Not way out there, not all the masses, not all the people who, will like this thing or notice this thing or write this article. No, what am I doing to minister to the people in my life? Like, Harry, what are you doing for your kids' teachers? What are you doing for your kids' coaches? What are you doing for, the dads, the other dads that your kids go to school? Are you like meeting with the dads? Are you getting to know any of them? Are you guys going on camping trips with your kids? Like, what are you doing to be a part of a community? What are you doing to pour into your people? I don't know. I mean, I don't know everything that Harry does, but it just seems like with this much time that is spent on himself, no wonder he's depressed. It's a recipe for absolute depression to focus on yourself. I think our entire society is so geared toward the self, and how can I you know, nobody's noticing me enough, and how can I make much of myself, and why aren't more people noticing me, and why, you know, what can I do to get more people to realize how great I am? I mean, Harry's not the only one. I think we are a culture that is in decline because we're so self-centered and just navel-gazing all day long. Anyway, those are just my last thoughts. I'm sure I'll think later, oh, I wish I would have said this, or this in the video. But yeah, my ultimate takeaway is the royal family has nothing to worry about this book. It's a book of fairy tales. It's a book of slander. It's poorly written. It wasn't edited. It was incoherent 75% of the way. The ghostwriter should be ashamed that he let his name be attached to this, because it's not flattering to him as a writer. I've read ghostwritten works by this guy before, and I would say that they were much less jumbled and meaningless. But then again, it could be that I knew less about the subjects of those books than I knew about Harry, and admittedly I didn't know that much about Harry, but it could just be that I knew less. Maybe that those books were full of lies too, but I tend to think that they weren't. There wasn't really much of a backlash. So, I don't know. I just don't know why Harry wrote this, and I think that he needs to never consider writing another book. Ever. Ever, ever. He doesn't have anything to say, and I hope nobody would buy the second book. It pains me to think about how many people spent their hard-earned money on this, which is exactly why I decided to do this channel in the first place. Because I knew that if I did this, then it might mean that fewer people bought the book. And y'all can't afford to be spending your money on that. I mean, even I, when I bought it, my husband like saw it come in the mail and he's like, "What in the world is this? Send that back right now." And I was like, I have plans. Which, by the way, speaking of hard-earned money, and this is the last thing I'll say in this video, a number of you have said, super generously, may I say, you said, you know, you need to set up, you know, something so that we can tip you or send you things or whatever. Which I think is just beyond the beyonds of generous. I cannot even understand why anyone would want to tip me. But I have to say that I don't believe in tipping, because you should save your hard-earned money and you just enjoy this content for free. But what you can do is send this video to people, or not maybe necessarily this video, this was just the end, but if there's videos that you like from this channel, if there's shorts that you like, you send those along. Send them to friends, post them on Facebook, post them on Twitter, because let YouTube pay me, you know? The bigger this channel gets, YouTube will pay me, but you save your money. But I have to say that I have been greatly touched by people's generosity, and I haven't had a chance to just say in a video, thank you so much to anybody who's ever even thought that, but to the many people who've mentioned it in the comments, I'm so touched. Deeply, deeply I am. Because I truly am like, why would anybody want to give me anything? But thank you so much. Okay, that is the end. Now, later this week, we're going to start Revenge. And last night I was reading it. I was just like, oh Lord, thank you so very much for this, because it's facts. And I'll tell you the first thing that stood out to me just in the prologue was how many quotes he uses. Using actual names, using actual quotes, people saying things. I mean, it's all documented. I mean, it is a beautiful thing to see. And I like just the first chapter alone had more information, more factual content in it than the entirety of Spare. That one little first chapter, the first chapter is called Thomas. So we're going to be talking about Meghan Markle's dad and her mom and the history of both families. And it was a fascinating read. Super short chapter, still packed with content. So later this week, a video will be coming out. We will be starting Revenge. And I'm not going to have any cutesy little name. It's just going to be called Revenge Review. So we'll be getting in that together. I hope you guys have a wonderful start of your week, and I will be posting later. Bye.